What chance did a woman truly have in a world where every law was crafted to bind her silence? And every courtroom echoed with voices that believed female piracy was not just unlawful, but unnatural. In the shadowy corners of history, amid tales of treasure ships and rum-soaked revolt, there are stories that rarely surface, stories of women who sailed against empire and expectation, only to be met with punishment so brutal, so calculated, that even their memories were nearly erased. This is not a story of legends. It is a story of silence, of women who fought, commanded, and dared to exist outside the bounds of their time, and of how the world, in response, made them disappear. Chapter 1. A courtroom already decided. In the 17th and 18th centuries, the so-called Golden Age of Piracy, justice for pirates was swift, cruel, and unrelenting. But for women, it was doubly harsh. Captured female pirates were seen not just as criminals, but as aberrations, offenses to imperial authority and to the natural order. The very idea of a woman wielding a sword or commanding a ship threatened the rigid gender hierarchy the empire depended on. When women stood trial in British Admiralty Courts, they entered spaces already arranged against them. These naval courts, often hastily assembled in colonial outposts like Jamaica or the Bahamas, were stripped of juries. The judges were officers of the empire. The sentences were almost always foregone conclusions. The legal process may have moved quickly, but it was never quiet. The testimonies rang out like cannon fire, ship captains eager to prove loyalty, sailors desperate to distance themselves, officers eager for spectacle. The accused, often shackled, exhausted, and poorly represented, had little room to defend themselves. The story of Anne Bonny and Mary Read stands out, not because it was unique, but because it was recorded. In 1720, the two women were captured with Calico Jack Rackham and brought to trial in Spanish Town, Jamaica. Their very presence in court scandalized the public. Anne Bonny's words to her condemned lover became legend. "If you had fought like a man, you need not have been hanged like a dog." Their only hope lay in one legal loophole. Pregnancy, pleading the belly, was a defense unique to women, and it was reluctantly respected. For Bonny and Read, it granted temporary stays of execution, but for most women, such fortune never came. They were found guilty not just of piracy, but of existing outside control. The sentence was not merely death, it was erasure. Chapter 2. Gallows at Wapping, Death as Performance. The River Thames, ever patient, rolled past the banks of Wapping, but on certain mornings the peaceful waters bore witness to screams, jeers, and the crack of rope tightening around necks. At Execution Dock, the British Empire turned death into theater, and pirates, male or female, were its unwilling performers. Piracy, under British law, was no ordinary crime. It was treason at sea. The Piracy Act of 1698 made the punishment unmistakably clear: death by hanging, to be carried out under the authority of the Admiralty. Those condemned were not rushed to the scaffold. They were paraded. From Newgate Prison, the accused were carted through the streets of London under heavy guard. Crowds gathered to curse, gawk, and occasionally weep. For the condemned, it was a slow march toward oblivion. Once at the dock, the final moments began, not with mercy, but with tradition. The noose was fitted, the trap readied, but the Admiralty did not offer the long drop of a quick death. Instead, the rope was short. The condemned dangled, twitching and gasping in what sailors grimly called the Marshal's Dance, a cruel ballet of strangulation that could last for minutes. Women were not spared this ritual. Their executions were fewer, but every bit as theatrical. Mary Critchett is one such name, a woman who sailed with a band of escaped convicts turned pirates near Virginia in 1729. She was captured, tried, and hanged in Williamsburg. There was no delay, no reprieve. She did not get to plead her belly. She did not get remembered except in the ledgers of death. Even in death, pirates served the empire. The worst offenders were gibbeted, their bodies left to hang in irons until the tide had washed over them 3 times. This was rare for women, but the possibility alone served a purpose: to turn fear into obedience. Beneath the gallows, the empire made clear: Piracy would not be tolerated, and women who dared to defy it would be turned from stories into warnings. Chapter 3. The lash and the crowd execution was not always the first punishment. For many women, the whip came before the rope, and with it came humiliation, spectacle, and agony. Flogging was a favorite tool of colonial and naval discipline. It required no trial, no verdict, only an accusation and a whip. And for female pirates, it carried a particular cruelty. Their bodies became canvases for punishment. Their pain was not hidden. It was made public. The cat-o'-nine tails, a whip with 9 knotted cords, was capable of shredding flesh with each strike. Sentences ranged from a dozen lashes to over 100. The pain was immense. The scars permanent. And the audience? Everyone. Townspeople, soldiers, even children gathered to watch. Punishment took place on the docks, outside prisons, or aboard ships, anywhere the message could spread. For the authorities, each lash was a reminder women who dared to command, to fight, to lead would be brought low in full view of society. Anne Bonny and Mary Red were reportedly held in horrific conditions after their capture in Jamaica. While no record confirms they were flogged, many women in similar circumstances were. In colonial ports from the American South to the West Indies, flogging was standard, administered before sentencing, after sentencing, or simply to break the will. These public whippings served 2 purposes: deterrence and degradation. They weren't about reform, they were about power. They were about ensuring that no other woman would be inspired to follow in the footsteps of a pirate. In these moments, justice transformed into theater, one built not on guilt but on control. Blood mixed with salt air, and the message rang clear: pain is obedience, and defiance will not be tolerated. Chapter 4. Sold, taken, disappeared. Not all women found on pirate ships were hanged. Some were taken, some were sold, and some simply disappeared, absorbed into the machinery of colonial life, never to be heard from again. In the Spanish and Portuguese empires, the boundaries between piracy, slavery, and spoils of war were often indistinct. When a pirate vessel was captured, its crew was evaluated. The men were usually tried. The women, especially those of African or indigenous descent, were often categorized as cargo. Archival records from places like Cartagena and Portobello in the 1600s describe women taken from ships and processed as property. Sometimes they were crew, sometimes captives. The court didn't care. The outcome was often the same: forced servitude. These women were sent to plantations, domestic service, or forced concubinage. They lost their names, their stories, their pasts, and they were never counted again. Not as pirates, not as prisoners, not as people. Even in English-controlled territories, women aboard captured pirate ships were not always tried. Many were instead assigned to officials, merchants, or local elites. In cases where women were mixed race or black, they were assumed to be slaves, regardless of their actual status. There is no shortage of speculation about what happened to these women. What there is a shortage of is record, and in that silence lies a deeper truth. For many female pirates, justice didn't look like a trial. It looked like disappearance. These were not women who went down fighting. They were women erased without a trace. The empire didn't need to kill them, it only needed to forget them. Chapter 5. The Death Below Deck. Some pirates never saw the gallows, nor the plantation, nor the lash. Some were locked away, forgotten in the holds of ships never meant to house human beings. Prison hulks, decommissioned warships moored in harbors, became the final destination for many accused of piracy. These ships, stripped of sails and left to rot, were used as floating prisons by the British Navy. They were anchored in places like Portsmouth, Plymouth, and Kingston, and on board, the condemned wasted away. Conditions were monstrous. Prisoners were chained below deck in overcrowded, poorly ventilated compartments. Disease was rampant. Food was spoiled. Sanitation was non-existent. Death came slowly, often through infection, starvation, or despair. Women aboard these hulks were subjected to the same horrors and more. Exploitation was common. Abuse by guards or sailors went unrecorded, but not unimagined. And because women were fewer in number, they were often isolated, unaccounted for, and utterly invisible in the bureaucratic machinery of prison management. There are no dramatic gallows tales for these women, no court transcripts, no famous quotes, only absence. They vanished into ships that themselves vanished from history. Their deaths were not seen, and therefore not mourned. This was the final punishment, not execution, but erasure. Conclusion: the story of female pirates is not one of triumph or legend. It is a story of control, brutality, and deliberate forgetting. These women challenged more than imperial authority. They challenged gender roles, economic systems, and social order, and for that they were not merely punished, they were removed. Removed from the record, from memory, from history. What remains today are fragments, brief mentions in legal documents, second-hand descriptions in colonial journals, names etched into execution ledgers and trial logs, but their stories still whisper through the pages of silence. What does it say about power? That it not only destroys its enemies, but erases the evidence of their defiance. What does it say about justice when the mere existence of a woman with a sword was enough to merit death? And what does it say about memory when we forget not because we must, but because we are taught to? These are not legends. These were women. And their stories, though buried, still matter. As Tacitus warned, the more corrupt the state, the more numerous the laws. Let us not forget the women who were silenced, not by the waves, but by the world above them.